Danny was a hunter. He'd been a hunter as long as he could remember. For it was his grandfather who first took him into the woods. And he learned how to handle a rifle and a shotgun and a bow and arrow. As he grew older and older, his grandfather was always there to teach him the signs that he would see in the woods, to teach him of safety and reverence for the land. And every opportunity Danny could find through his adolescence and into his young adulthood, he was in the woods hunting. Whatever the season was, there was an animal that could be harvested. Whatever time of the year, whether in the woods or in the prairie or somewhere in between, there you would find Danny hunting. And he honed and sharpened his skills so that he always came back with plenty of game to feed his grandfather and his friends. It was early one morning. Danny was preparing to be participating in the coming deer season, and he was establishing a location where he knew would be on the path of deer, where he would be successful. As it was dawning, it was foggy, and Danny was beginning to orient where he needed to go to return back through the woods to his car. And he was crossing a place in the woods that was near where there had once been a church and now only remained a cemetery. There was a bit of a clearing and a driveway that went off to the left. And as Danny was exiting down past that cemetery, through the fog that was lifting that morning, there he spotted a young doe deer. He estimated her to perhaps be 2 years old. And Danny thought for a moment, the time's not right. Season doesn't begin until tomorrow, but who will know? Danny carefully took aim, and as he looked down the sights of his rifle, that doe deer turned her head ever so slightly, and their eyes met. His, the sharp blue eyes of a marksman, and hers, the soft, warm eyes of a deer. Danny took his breath and held it, steadied his rifle. But as he looked into her eyes and she into his, he could not pull the trigger. But he slowly dropped his rifle. At that moment, the sound of an automobile was heard coming up the paved road in a hill that was not far away. And the doe was startled at that moment. And out of her instinct, she ran. And she ran in the direction that she probably always ran as she made her circuitous route through the woods. And she ran in that direction, and Danny knew what was going to happen. Danny dropped his gun and ran down the road that was a more direct path to the highway. And sure enough, as Danny ran down to the highway, the car was approaching up the hill. She had frozen in the middle of the road. And in those early hours with the fog, the headlights beamed across the road. Danny stepped out into the path of the automobile and waved his hands as the automobile squealed to a stop, just gently bumping Danny. Danny had fallen to the ground at the side of the road. The driver got out of the car, rushed to see what had happened, and Danny was already up saying, "It's okay, it's okay. I'm all right. I'm not hurt. No damage done." And Danny turned, and so the driver did, to see the doe deer move from her motionless stance and scamper off into the woods. Danny went back a few days later, at about the same time in the early morning, just out of curiosity. And sure enough, as he stepped out of the woods into that little clearing near the cemetery, there she was again, almost in the same position as what he had encountered a few days before. And sure enough, their eyes met once again. About every week or so, Danny would return to that same spot at about the same time. And over the next weeks, he began to coax the deer toward him. Well, he enticed her with a bit of salt, a bit of grain. And within a few months, he was able to come both in the morning and the evening if he chose, and she would appear at that same place. And she was coming closer and closer until the day he was able to feed her out of his hand and stroke her gentle, soft body, to feel the warmth of her nuzzling in his hand as she ate. They began to meet regularly. Danny was so curious as to how this bond could occur. Well, he had dogs and cats and pets at home, but this was a creature of the wild that had now formed a relationship with him. As he began to think about that, in the moments between, the days that would pass when he would see her next, curious as to what she might think of him, if it was as deep and as convoluted as his own feelings toward her. And Danny remembered there was an old Cherokee that had a kind of a souvenir, arts and curios and Native American craft store on the north edge of town. He remembered being taken to that store as a child by his grandfather. Only been there a few times, but not much in his adulthood. It was still there. And so one day he went to this shop. Well, in the shop was filled a number of trinkets and souvenirs made from all over the world, from China, but there were a few authentic Native American goods and objects there. And it was still that old Cherokee that still ran the store. Danny approached him cautiously and said, "You remember me?" And the old Cherokee looked and said, "Well, I remember you through the years. Your grandfather brought you as a child." "Yes," Danny said, I want to talk to you